Intensive animal farming or industrial livestock production, also called factory farming by opponents of the practice, is a modern form of intensive farming that refers to the keeping of livestock, such as cattle, poultry and fish at higher stocking densities than is usually the case with other forms of animal agriculture, a practice typical in industrial farming by agribusinesses. The main products of this industry are meat, milk and eggs for human consumption. There are issues regarding whether factory farming is sustainable and ethical. Confinement at high stocking density is one part of a systematic effort to produce the highest output at the lowest cost by relying on economies of scale, modern machinery, biotechnology, and global trade. There are differences in the way factory farming techniques are practiced around the world. There is a continuing debate over the benefits, risks and ethical questions of factory farming. The issues include the efficiency of food production, animal welfare, whether it is essential for feeding the growing global population, and the environmental impact and health risks. History. The practice of industrial animal agriculture is a relatively recent development in the history of agriculture, and the result of scientific discoveries and technological advances. Innovations in agriculture beginning in the late 19th century generally parallel developments in mass production in other industries that characterized the latter part of the Industrial Revolution. The discovery of vitamins and the role in animal nutrition in the first 2 decades of the 20th century led to vitamin supplements, which allowed chickens to be raised indoors. The discovery of antibiotics and vaccines facilitated raising livestock in larger numbers by reducing disease. Chemicals developed for use in World War II gave rise to synthetic pesticides. Developments in shipping networks and technology have made long-distance distribution of agricultural produce feasible. Agricultural production across the world doubled 4 times between 1820 and 1975 to feed a global population of 1 billion human beings in 1800, and 6.5 billion in 2002. During the same period, the number of people involved in farming dropped as the process became more automated. In the 1930s, 24% of the American population worked in agriculture compared to 1.5% in 2002. In 1940, each farm worker supplied 11 consumers, whereas in 2002, each worker supplied 90 consumers. According to the BBC, the era of factory farming per se in Britain began in 1947 when a new Agriculture Act granted subsidies to farmers to encourage greater output by introducing new technology. In order to reduce Britain's reliance on imported meat, the United Nations writes that intensification of animal production was seen as a way of providing food security. Quote, in 1966, the United States, United Kingdom and other industrialized nations commenced factory farming of beef and dairy cattle and domestic pigs. From its American and West European heartland, factory farming became globalized in the later years of the 20th century and is still expanding and replacing traditional practices of stock rearing in an increasing number of countries. In 1990, factory farming accounted for 30% of world meat production, and by 2005 this had risen to 40%. Contemporary animal production. Factory farms hold large numbers of animals, typically cows, pigs, turkeys, or chickens, are often indoors, typically at high densities. The aim of the operation is to produce large quantities of meat, eggs, or milk at the lowest possible cost. Food is supplied in place. Methods employed to maintain health and improve production may include some combination of disinfectants, antimicrobial agents, anthelmintics, hormones and vaccines, protein, mineral and vitamin supplements, frequent health inspections, biosecurity, climate-controlled facilities and other measures. Physical restraints, e.g., fences or creeps, are used to control movement or actions regarded as undesirable. Breeding programs are used to produce animals more suited to the confined conditions and able to provide a consistent food product. Intensive production of livestock and poultry is widespread in developed nations. For 2002-2003, the estimates of industrial production as a percentage of global production were 7% for beef and veal, 0.8% for sheep and goat meat, 42% for pork, and 67% for poultry meat. Industrial production was estimated to account for 39% of the sum of global production of these meats and 50% of total egg production. In the U.S., according to its National Pork Producers Council, 80 million of its 95 million pigs slaughtered each year are reared in industrial settings. Chickens in the United States. Chickens were raised primarily on family farms until 1965. Originally, the primary value in poultry was eggs, and meat was considered a byproduct of egg production. Its supply was less than the demand, and poultry was expensive. Except in hot weather, eggs can be shipped and stored without refrigeration for some time before going bad. This was important in the days before widespread refrigeration. Farm flocks tended to be small because the hens largely fed themselves through foraging, with some supplementation of grain, scraps, and waste products from other farm ventures. Such feedstuffs were in limited supply, especially in the winter, and this tended to regulate the size of the farm flocks. Soon after, poultry keeping gained the attention of agricultural researchers. Improvements in nutrition and management made poultry keeping more profitable and businesslike. Prior to about 1910, chicken was served primarily on special occasions as Sunday dinner. Poultry was shipped live or killed, plucked, and packed on ice. The whole, ready-to-cook broiler was not popular until the 1950s, when end-to-end refrigeration and sanitary practices gave consumers more confidence. Before this, poultry were often cleaned by the neighborhood butcher, though cleaning poultry at home was a commonplace kitchen skill. Two kinds of poultry were generally used: broilers or spring chickens, young male chickens, a byproduct of the egg industry, which were sold when still young and tender, and stewing hens, also a byproduct of the egg industry, which were old hens past the prime for laying. The major milestone in 20th century poultry production was the discovery of vitamin D, which made it possible to keep chickens in confinement year-round. Before this, chickens did not thrive during the winter, and egg production, incubation, and meat production in the off-season were all very difficult, making poultry a seasonal and expensive proposition. Year-round production lowered costs, especially for broilers. At the same time, egg production was increased by scientific breeding. After a few false starts, success was shown by Professor Dryden at the Oregon Experiment Station. Improvements in production and quality were accompanied by lower labor requirements. In the 1930s through the early 1950s, 1,500 hens was considered to be a full-time job for a farm family. In the late 1950s, egg prices had fallen so dramatically that farmers typically tripled the number of hens they kept, parting 3 hens into what had been a single bird cage or converting the floor confinement houses from a single-decker roost to triple-decker roosts. Not long after this, prices fell still further and large numbers of egg farmers left the business. Robert Plamondon reports that the last family chicken farm in his part of Oregon, Rex Farms, had 30,000 layers and survived into the 1990s. But the standard laying house of the current operators is around 125,000 hens. This fall in profitability was accompanied by a general fall in and prices to the consumer, allowing poultry and eggs to lose the status as luxury foods. The vertical integration of the egg and poultry industries was a late development, occurring after all the major technological changes had been in place for years. By the late 1950s, poultry production had changed dramatically. Large farms and packing plants could grow birds by the tens of thousands. Chickens could be sent to slaughterhouses for butchering and processing into prepackaged commercial products to be frozen or shipped fresh to markets or wholesalers. Meat-type chickens currently grow to market weight in 6 to 7 weeks, whereas only 50 years ago it took 3 times as long. This is due to genetic selection and nutritional modifications. Once a meat consumed only occasionally, the common availability and lower cost has made chicken a common meat product within developed nations. Growing concerns over the cholesterol content of red meat in the 1980s and 1990s further resulted in increased consumption of chicken. Today, eggs are produced on large egg ranches on which environmental parameters are well controlled. Chickens are exposed to artificial light cycles to stimulate egg production year-round. In addition, it is a common practice to induce molting through careful manipulation of light and the amount of food they receive in order to further increase egg size and production. On average, a chicken lays 1 egg a day, but not on every day of the year. This varies with the breeding time of year. In 1900, average egg production was 83 eggs per hen per year. In 2000, it was well over 300. In the United States, laying hens are butchered after the second egg-laying season. In Europe, they are generally butchered after a single season. The laying period begins when the hen is about 18 to 20 weeks old. Males of the egg-type breeds have little commercial value at any age, and all those not used for breeding are killed soon after hatching. The old hens also have little commercial value. Thus, the main sources of poultry meat 100 years ago have both been entirely supplanted by meat-type broiler chickens. Some believe that the deadly H5N1 strain of bird flu is essentially a problem of industrial poultry practices. On the other hand, according to the CDC article H5N1 Outbreaks and Exotic Influenza by Robert G. Webster et al., transmission of highly pathogenic H5N1 from domestic poultry back to migratory waterfowl in western China has increased the geographic spread. The spread of H5N1 and its likely reintroduction to domestic poultry increase the need for good agricultural vaccines. In fact, the root cause of the continuing H5N1 pandemic threat may be the way the pathogenicity of H5N1 viruses is masked by co-circulating influenza viruses, or bad agricultural vaccines. Webster explains, if you use a good vaccine you can prevent the transmission within poultry and to humans. But if they have been using vaccines now for several years, why is there so much bird flu? There is bad vaccine that stops the disease in the bird, but the bird goes on pooping out virus and maintaining it and changing it. And I think this is what is going on in China. It has to be. Either there is not enough vaccine being used, there is substandard vaccine being used. Probably both. It's not just China. We can't blame China for substandard vaccines. I think there are substandard vaccines for influenza in poultry all over the world. In response to the same concerns, Reuters reports Hong Kong infectious disease expert Lo Wing Lok saying that the issue of vaccines has to take top priority, and Julie Hall, in charge of the WHO's outbreak response in China, saying that China's vaccinations might be masking the virus. The BBC reported that Wendy Barclay, a virologist at the University of Reading, UK, said, "The Chinese have made a vaccine based on reverse genetics made with H5N1 antigens, and they have been using it. There has been a lot of criticism of what they have done, because they have protected the chickens against death from this virus, but the chickens still get infected, and then you get drift. The virus mutates in response to the antibodies, and now we have a situation where we have 5 or 6 flavors of H5N1 out there. Keeping wild birds away from domestic birds is known to be key in the fight against H5N1. Caging is one way. Providing wild birds with restored wetlands so they naturally choose non-livestock areas is another way that helps accomplish this. Political forces are increasingly demanding the selection of one, the other, or both based on non-scientific reasons. Cattle are domesticated ungulates, a member of the family Bovidae in the subfamily Bovinae, and descended from the aurochs. They are raised as livestock for meat, dairy products, leather, and as draft animals. In some countries, such as India, they are honored in religious ceremonies and revered. As of 2009-2010, it is estimated that there are 1.3 to 1.4 billion head of cattle in the world. Cattle are often raised by allowing herds to graze on the grasses of large tracts of rangeland called ranches. Raising cattle in this manner allows the productive use of land that might be unsuitable for growing crops. The most common interactions with cattle involve daily feeding, cleaning, and milking. Many routine husbandry practices involve ear tagging, dehorning, loading, medical operations, vaccinations, and hoof care, as well as training for agricultural shows and preparations. There are also some cultural differences in working with cattle. The cattle husbandry of Fulani men rests on behavioral techniques, whereas in Europe cattle are controlled primarily by physical means like fences. Once cattle obtain an entry-level weight, about 650 pounds, they are transferred from the range to a feedlot to be fed specialized animal feed which consists of corn byproducts, barley, and other grains as well as alfalfa and cottonseed meal. The feed also contains premixes composed of microingredients such as vitamins, minerals, chemical preservatives, antibiotics, fermentation products, and other essential ingredients that are purchased from premix companies, usually in sacked form, for blending into commercial rations. Because of the availability of these products, a farmer using their own grain can formulate their own rations and be assured the animals are getting the recommended levels of minerals and vitamins. Cattle in the UK are mostly grass-fed with the occasional extra such as a mineral liquor feed. Breeders can utilize cattle husbandry to reduce bovis infection susceptibility by selective breeding and maintaining herd health to avoid concurrent disease. Cattle are farmed for beef, veal, dairy, leather, and they are sometimes used simply to maintain grassland for wildlife. For example, in Epping Forest, England, they are often used in some of the most wild places for livestock. Depending on the breed, cattle can survive on hill grazing, heaths, marshes, moors, and semi-desert. Modern cows are more commercial than older breeds and, having become more specialized, are less versatile. For this reason, many smaller farmers still favor old breeds, such as the dairy breed of cattle Jersey. There are many potential impacts on human health due to the modern cattle industrial agriculture system. There are concerns surrounding the antibiotics and growth hormones used, increased E. coli contamination, higher saturated fat contents in the meat because of the feed, and also environmental concerns. As of 2010, in the 766,350 producers participate in raising beef. The beef industry is segmented, with the bulk of the producers participating in raising beef calves. Beef calves are generally raised in small herds, with over 90% of the herds having less than 100 head of cattle. Fewer producers participate in the finishing phase, which often occurs in a feedlot, but nonetheless there are 82,170 feedlots in the United States. Pigs. Intensive piggeries are a type of concentrated animal feeding operation specialized for the raising of domestic pigs up to slaughter weight. In this system of pig production, grower pigs are housed indoors in group housing or straw-lined sheds, whilst pregnant sows are confined in sow stalls and give birth in farrowing crates. The use of sow stalls has resulted in lower production costs. However, this practice has led to more significant animal welfare concerns. Many of the world's largest producers of pigs use sow stalls, but some nations and some U.S. states have banned them. Intensive piggeries are generally large warehouse-like buildings. Indoor pig systems allow the pig's condition to be monitored, ensuring minimum fatalities and increased productivity. Buildings are ventilated and the temperature regulated. Most domestic pig varieties are susceptible to heat stress, and all pigs lack sweat glands and cannot cool themselves. Pigs have a limited tolerance to high temperatures, and heat stress can lead to death. Maintaining a more specific temperature within the pig tolerance range also maximizes growth and growth-to-feed ratio. In an intensive operation, pigs will lack access to a wallow, which is the natural cooling mechanism. Intensive piggeries control temperature through ventilation or drip water systems. Pigs are naturally omnivorous and are generally fed a combination of grains and protein sources. Larger intensive pig farms may be surrounded by farmland where feed grain crops are grown. Alternatively, piggeries are reliant on the grains industry. Pig feed may be bought packaged or mixed on site. The intensive piggery system, where pigs are confined in individual stalls, allows each pig to be allotted a portion of feed. The individual feeding system also facilitates individual medication of pigs through feed. This has more significance to intensive farming methods, as the close proximity to other animals enables diseases to spread more rapidly. To prevent disease spreading and encourage growth, drug programs such as antibiotics, vitamins, hormones and other supplements are preemptively administered. Indoor systems, especially stalls and pens, allow for the easy collection of waste. In an indoor intensive pig farm, manure can be managed through a lagoon system or other waste management system. However, odor remains a problem which is difficult to manage. The way animals are housed in intensive systems varies. Breeding sows will spend the bulk of the time in sow stalls during pregnancy or farrowing crates with litter until market. Piglets often receive range of treatments including castration, tail docking to reduce tail biting, teeth clipped and their ears notched to assist identification. Treatments are usually made without painkillers. Weak runts may be slain shortly after birth. Piglets also may be weaned and removed from the sows at between 2 and 5 weeks old and placed in sheds. However, grower pigs, which comprise the bulk of the herd, are usually housed in alternative indoor housing, such as batch pens. During pregnancy, the use of a stall may be preferred as it facilitates feed management and growth control. It also prevents pig aggression. Group pens generally require higher stockmanship skills. Such pens will usually not contain straw or other material. Alternatively, a straw-lined shed may house a larger group in age groups. Many countries have introduced laws to regulate treatment of farmed animals. In the USA, the Federal Humane Slaughter Act requires pigs to be stunned before slaughter, although compliance and enforcement is questioned.